First, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Alexandra M. Lucas. I'm a game writer and narrative designer. I spent the last 2 years writing for Microsoft's Cortana team, and I'm currently narrative lead on a project I can't talk about. But I've worked on a variety of game types, from RTS mobile games to interactive novels to educational MMORPGs, delivered presentations and published on romance and sexuality in games, mental health in games, and gender identity in pop culture. And I've telecommuted with clients across the country, across the US, where I'm based, as well as Eastern Europe. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to my other panelists here.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Clough. I am also a writer and narrative designer. I am also the token non-American of the panel. I'm actually based in Vancouver, British Columbia. And as a result, I have basically had nothing but international clients. All of my American clients have been international. And I've also worked with clients in the Ukraine, Hungary, China, and so on. I've worked in visual novel games, in third-person shooters, match 3 mobile games, and in my spare time, I also chair the IGDA Romance and Sexuality Special Interest Group.
Great.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heidi McDonald. I'm a little bit under the weather. I apologize for that. I've been in the games industry for about 8 years, doing writing and game design and creative direction and all kinds of stuff like that. Lately, I have gone independent, and I am currently working on a contract for Disruptor Beam on an unannounced mobile title that's very exciting. So, yeah, I've been working remotely about 3.5 years, so it's fun.
Hi, my name is Patrick Corsi. I'm yet another writer, narrative designer. I've been working in the industry for about 5 years and freelancing for about 4 of those years. My last big contract was a 2.5 year long stint at a studio in Melbourne, where I spent half the time actually in country in the studio, and the rest of it I spent as a remote designer. Working for them on a title that is yet unannounced. Before that, I worked with a studio in Switzerland, Blindflug Studios, on 2 games, Cloud Chasers, which was an award-winning mobile game, and then the follow-up to that was a sequel, Earhart, which just recently hit Switch and has done very well there, so I'm very proud of that. And then before that, I worked in a variety of genre, augmented reality, alternate reality games, internet video, stuff like that. So I've done a bunch of things.
Hi, everybody. I am Toya Kristen Finley. I am a writer and editor in general, so I work in different media. And in games, I am a game designer, a narrative designer, and an editor. And I have been telecommuting my entire adult life, just about. So I'm very familiar with it. I think I have been in a room with the team that I have worked with all of 3 days for the almost 20 years that I have been telecommuting. I am on the executive board of the IGDA Game Writing SIG. I have also done a couple of books. I co-authored the Game Narrative Toolbox. That was with 3 other authors. It was done virtually. I am also the editor and contributor to Narrative Tactics for mobile and social games, pocket-sized storytelling. And I have had clients in Chile, Portugal, Singapore, Australia, China, as well as the United States.
Okay, great. So welcome to our panelists. Thanks for being here today. We're going to go ahead and dive in. Our first question is telecommuting actually doable? So what would you say to a telecommuting skeptic?
I'd say that on days when you really don't feel well and don't have a very good voice, that's the perfect time to have a telecommuting job. And you also have the benefit of not needing to wear pants. And I mean, I am wearing pants. You can't see. I am wearing them. I wore them for you.
I have a running gag where I have a line item on my invoices, an add-on for pants wearing.
There you go. Yeah,
If they want to pay me more, I'll wear pants.
At the office, you would have casual Fridays, but you can have no pants Fridays.
So there's that. All right. Michelle, you have something?
Another thing that's actually really nice about telecommuting is if you are in the phase of your career where you may have a day job that has absolutely nothing to do with video gaming, in which case you have to go out to your local office or your local job, and then you get to come home, throw off all your clothes, pants optional, and sit down at your computer and do some work there, or curl up in bed and do stuff on your laptop. So it is actually it's eminently doable if you are, and indeed might even be the best way to do it if you're still kind of doing work part-time on top of a non-industry day job, or indeed an industry day job.
So I was apparently doing telecommuting before it was a thing, so I would say hell yes. This is actually my 11th GDC in a row, and I thank you. So my first GDC, I knew nothing about game development. I had been publishing as a fiction writer, and I just wanted to find out, can I do this in games as well? And the thing I was being told, because I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, which is an amazing game hub. No, it is not. Oh, you're from Nashville too. Awesome. There's hardly any game development whatsoever in Nashville. And I said, hey, I would really like to get into games writing. And 11 years ago, people were telling me, you have to move. And I was thinking, why? I have a laptop. I'm able to send emails and send documents. But there was a lot of skepticism, right? But there weren't all of these platforms back then, like Jira and Freedcamp and Trello. And so now it's a lot easier. You have a lot more virtual studios as well, because renting an office space is very expensive. And so devs are finding out, hey, we can make this work. We can have people located all across the world. And the other thing is, sometimes the right person is on the other side of the world than you are. And they're the right person for the job, and you can't bring them to you. And so skeptics need to understand that this is a greater opportunity for people who are marginalized as well and can't just take up and move to a hub. It's expensive.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo that what you're talking about in terms of the resources and the tool sets that are available now. It seems like now, as opposed to, he told me to angle it this way, so I'm going to try to do it this way. As opposed to, even 5-7 years ago, is the best time for telecommuting. It's one of we have the broadest range of tool sets in terms of communication, in terms of content delivery, in terms of co-working on any sort of like documentation or things like that. The tools and the resources for those sorts of things have exploded in the past few years. So much so that I worked on a studio that was like constantly on the hunt for the best one, and we were changing. It was in a great environment, but we were changing tool sets for communication for like just team chat over and over again 3 times just to find one just for us. So yeah, the answer would be yes, absolutely. But and we'll talk about it later. There are challenges that rise up because of that you have to be aware of, and it depends on the discipline. Like writing has a long history before computers of remote working, so there's a little more infrastructure there. Departments like art or programming have a little more nuance and some challenges that you need to be aware of when you start going into that field.
I just wanted to jump off something that Toya said about telecommuting being really good for marginalized people. I have a really goofy life. I spend half of my time in Pittsburgh. I spend half of my time in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a special needs child, and I have rheumatoid arthritis. And all of those things put together would make it really, really hard for me to actually go and attend a job every day. But I mean, I have been able to turn out award-winning work despite that, because of the fact that I've had the flexibility to work remotely. And I don't think it's as much convincing people that working remotely is great. I think it's a matter of convincing companies that it's really to your interest to allow this as a choice for people who need it. Working remotely is not for everybody, but it is something that I think would make things better and help bring in a more diverse group of developers across the board if companies, gave that choice more readily to people who would like it.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in real quickly and we'll move on to our next question. My husband and I recently moved to a small town just outside Seattle after being based in Seattle a long time, and it is half the cost of Seattle. And part of how we were able to do that is we simply asked our employers if telecommuting was possible, and they said yes. And it was just something we hadn't considered, or we'd felt they'd really be closed off to. And part of it is finding sort of a telecommuting setup that works for you and the client. So I know folks who work at studios where it's 2 days a week that are telecommuting, so everyone knows that and makes their schedules accordingly. So it is about working with the client, working with the studio to find something that works for everyone. So great. We'll go ahead and move on to our next question, which is, how do you find international/freelance clients?
So a couple of ways. Getting to know people in my own network, whether that is face-to-face at GDC or PAX or ECGC. And of course, not everybody can get to conferences. So like in Facebook groups, we have a game writing group on Twitter. And so people have gotten to know me, and when they meet someone who needs a game writer or a narrative designer or even an editor, they'll give that person my contact information. I get surprisingly wonderful random emails sometimes, or I will get someone contacting me through my website who was referred to me by someone else. So that's really important. And then, of course, there's the direct, I see a posting or something like that, and I will respond to it. And I find nowadays, like in the last couple of years, and it blows my mind, and I guess it shouldn't, but I'm thinking back to the days of when this didn't happen at all. There are Twitter postings for jobs, and now we're seeing more and more remote work, fine, or freelance contracting remotely, fine. So find those Twitter feeds where people are likely to post jobs. Find groups online over social media or even discussion forums like Unity forums or indie forums where people are posting gigs. And if they're like Unity or smaller indies, they're probably going to be working remotely with people anyway, because like I said, it's too hard to maintain a physical space. It's very expensive.
Yeah, hashtag game jobs, I think, is one of the big ones for Twitter, where you see a lot of postings there. I've noticed that a lot of people, when they're looking for work, despite the fact they want to work remotely, they'll still only focus on, when they're doing the job searches, they're looking at studios, they'll focus on ones that are regionally nearby, or they sort of get locked into a tunnel vision of places they want to live or something like that, instead of just doing a broad-based search for every studio or cold calling smaller studios to see what they need. So make sure when you're looking for job postings, it's okay to ping them and ask, hey, can this be remote? Or, hey, is this, hit them up on Twitter, hit their official Twitter account or something like that. Hey, can this be remote? I have my qualifications, but, I really like, the hot dog place down the street, so I don't really want to move or something like that. But also, you mentioned coming to GDC. My first international freelancing work I ever received was by going to the Swiss Games booth in GDC in 2014 and meeting the designer at Blindflug, and we just hit it off. And then he mentioned that he needed a game writer, and that's how we developed our relationship. So walking around and actually introducing yourself and not being so upfront to say, hey, can I work for you or anything like that, but just getting to know what their needs are, getting to know how you can help them out, getting to know what they're working on, not necessarily the thing that they're pitching at the moment, but in the future, and letting them know that you're available is an excellent way to start building up that network, building out your reputation, and getting your name in front of people's faces.
Let me jump in really quickly about something you said. A lot of times people don't know that they need you. You'll hear about a project that they're working on, and they don't have that position filled. And so when you're talking to someone, whether it's face-to-face or over email or however, look very carefully and listen very carefully to the holes that need to be filled, and then explain how you can fill that hole.
I would say take LinkedIn very seriously. I know a lot of people just kind of have like a half-assed profile or whatever, but I noticed that once I started actively updating my LinkedIn and treating it like a really serious place for people to find me, people started finding me. I had 3 different companies from other countries outside the United States all contact me based on LinkedIn. So I think that that's one of the places that people are going to find developers.
When I was given that advice about LinkedIn, I was very surprised because it's not really a site that a lot of people think about maintaining or going to every day. Or there are certain benefits to it, but it's certainly not on the daily hit of Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But it is the place to get your name in front of people who are hiring. Make sure it's actively maintain it. Yeah.
I'll also second the importance of LinkedIn, although I'll be sort of the odd one out and say that I don't keep mine as updated as I should, and yet I've got tons of work through LinkedIn even when it's not that updated. But definitely create at the very least a strong base profile that even if you're not updating it all the time, that someone can go to you and immediately see what your strengths are, what your skills are, and what they're looking for, and chances are you will get some messages. The other thing is make sure to have a website, with some strong portfolio pieces and an easy way to get in touch with you, because that's the other way that I've gotten most of my contracts is that, I've just been going about my daily life, and the next thing I know, bing, hey, I'm looking for a narrative designer, and your name's come up in Google, so, could we talk more about our project? And so there is something to be said for absolutely pursue the active ways of networking and getting on social media and talking to people, but don't neglect the sort of more, I don't want to say passive, but the sort of more permanent things that you have running in the background as well, because they can and will get you work, not necessarily consistently, but it's way better to have them than to not have them. And the other thing I would say is sort of on the case of networking, don't be afraid to in fact, actively network with people that are not necessarily going to get you a job, because you might think, well, I don't need to hang out with the writers, or the programmers or the artists. They're my competition. No, they're your colleagues, and if you make those connections with them, then later on, when someone says to say Toya, oh, I really want to make a game about, I don't know, steamy romance involving Dragon Age characters, she'll be like, that's not my bag.
No, that's you.
Actually, it's us. So make sure to make those connections with your own discipline as well.
Michelle said something really important beyond the steamy romance with the Dragon Age characters.
Also very important.
All I heard was Dragon Age.
She mentioned have a way to contact on your website. That sounds obvious, but sometimes the obvious needs to be stated. I had a friend on Facebook who was an editor putting an anthology together, and she was getting super frustrated because there were all of these writers she wanted to invite, but when she went to their websites, there was no contact information whatsoever. There was no web form. She would go to their LinkedIn, no way to contact them. And I know that for some of us, the internet can be a very scary place because we can get very unwanted attention. I, for a while, had somebody who, he wasn't dangerous, but he was just really annoying, and I did not want it to get dangerous. So I actually didn't have an online portfolio for a long time because I didn't want him to be able to contact me. But there are websites like Wix where you can make a website, and there is a contact form there where people don't see your email address. But if they fill in the contact form, it will go to your email. So put as much contact information online as you feel is comfortable, and that will keep you safe.
And that goes for every field too, not just writers or art. Even programmers or producers or any sort of department in the industry needs to have a billboard. A billboard that they can point to people who, if something comes along, you want to be ready when that opportunity comes along. You want to be able to say, not hold on a moment, I need to put something together for you, but you want to say, here's the link so you can look through my samples in whatever form they take, in whatever form, whether it's, a fancy Gantt chart or, I don't know. But whatever form those samples look like, whatever the form your billboard takes, you absolutely want to have that ready and available.
And this is my please be careful. There are plagiarists out there, PSA. There are plagiarists out there, and I do know people who've had samples online, and people have taken their samples and used it in their own applications. The best way to try to guard against that is a PDF. So if you have anything that is not in a PDF and it's online, please convert it to PDF as soon as possible. That's not a complete fail-safe, but if people are already too lazy to do their own work, it is a nice hurdle for them to get over.
Perfect. And last thought on that question, if you're feeling a little lost on how to start with getting involved in these communities, whether you're a writer or a sound designer or something else, a lot of folks up here mentioned that they run or are part of the IGDA SIGs, special interest groups. There's one for just about everything, and if there isn't, you can start it yourself. But that generally lead you to the relevant Facebook groups and meetups and assorted things. So that is a place you can start to get involved and to network. So, all right, our next question here. We'll dive into the pros and cons of using freelance platforms like Upwork, People Per Hour, and so on for those who use them.
Okay.
Second that.
So I used Elance before Elance was a thing. Elance merged with Odesk to become Upwork. Yes, you can get a living wage on freelance platforms like that, but it's difficult. One reason why is that the platforms themselves market themselves as places to find cheap work. So what ends up happening is you have non-professionals trying to do your job. And you also have cheap, scammy clients who want to pay you $5 and $10 an hour. And so what happens is it's very difficult to find great clients. Now, I did through Elance, but it is difficult, and you might end up spending way too much energy and time trying to figure out who's valid and who is not. So like right now, I have an Upwork profile. I haven't touched Upwork in probably like 3 or 4 years. Every once in a while, I will get an email from someone, who is looking for a game writer. But it's really not that useful for me. The one thing I will say that is actually nice about those platforms is if you jump through all of the hoops that you need to, you can make sure that you get paid if somebody tries to stiff you. But otherwise, I would stay away from them.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with everything Toy just mentioned. One thing I found it was useful for is if, for me, when I was trying to dip my toes into different types of writing or different types of professions that I hadn't really had much experience with, so it was a good way to like try stuff out while still getting some money for it. That's not the ideal method of making a living, but it was useful for me that I had a goal and I had a task, and so I could try my hand at this thing, like technical writing or something like that, while also still valuing my time properly. But there's a lot of competition and a lot of wage depression that happens on sites like that. So it's a tough choice.
Well, to the wage depression thing, there's also a lot of discrimination based upon where you live. You might be trying to get a professional rate, but the client might think, well, you live in this country, you don't need to make that much money. I mean, I know freelancers who have had to deal with that, so.
Yeah, I have either 4 or 5 accounts, with those types of places, and I've never gotten a single item of work from any of them. So I just pretty much leave the profiles alone and worry about other things. If it happens, great. But I don't put any real stock into those sites at all.
I think I have gone on Upwork like maybe like 4 or 5 times in my life. I managed to get one client, and it was mostly through Toya's recommendation, because there was a client that was looking for multiple writers, and then I pretty much never touched it again. So I am that means that I'm not the right person to be giving, insight on Upwork, or maybe it means I'm the perfect person to give insight, because you can quite happily go through your freelance career never touching any of them. So don't feel like you absolutely have, put up a profile, but do not feel that this is, needs to be, or indeed should be, the backbone of your telecommuting career.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question here is, how does one structure their day so that they actually get work done as a telecommuter? Big one.
Well, I am unusual among a lot of the telecommuters I know, in that I actually do try to structure my day a little bit like, a day in the office, like a 9 to 5. Although I've recently shifted from 10 to 6 because it just seems to work a bit better with my sort of mental cycle. That can be difficult to do when you are dealing, of course, with international clients that are in a different time zone. And in fact, one of my clients in China has asked me recently to, could you start work a little bit later, and then stick around a bit in the evening when we're all getting into the office. So I think it's a delicate balance between what are the prime times that you would like to work versus what are the prime times that your clients would like you to work. And sometimes it is completely fine to, in fact, encouraged to come down on your side and say, yes, I finish work at 6. That is when I will hand in my work for the day, and then I'm done. But in other cases, you may want to be a bit more flexible. In terms of other structure, as I said, I just mostly remember, 9 to 5 is my work time. I, take a little bit of time for lunch. Because of the nature of writing, I will sometimes stand up and wander around my apartment with a coffee cup, contemplating existence and, the nature of writing. And then I go back to work. So I do struggle with distraction, I'll be honest. And what I do is I've downloaded a whole bunch of apps that stop me from checking my phone and stop me from checking Facebook. So I highly recommend Forest if you're looking for, fun little apps that sort of, make you at least have to think about what you're doing online or on your phone. So that's how I manage to pretend like I'm working all day.
So if Michelle is the structured one, I would be the opposite of that. I'm somebody who has always been something of a night owl. It's like my most creative and best time ends up usually being in the middle of the night. So I had to have a conversation with my supervisor pretty early on about deadlines. It's like, when you say something is due by Monday, what time on Monday, right? And as soon as I understood that the deadline on Monday is when she clocks in at 8 o'clock on Monday, well, that's awesome. That means that I can be up till like 3 or 4 a.m. doing what I do. I love working at night because nobody else is awake. It's impossible to get bothered. It's like your phone isn't going to be going off and your Facebook isn't going to be, because everybody else is asleep, right? It's awesome. It's just, I'll sit there and I'll have my headphones on and my music on, and I'm just like cranking. And it's the middle of the night. I know that's not for everybody, but that's kind of what I do. So it's like I'll wake up around 11 and I'll get through all my social media, check emails and all that other stuff, see if my boss has left me anything that I need to answer right away. Then I'll go have lunch. I'll talk to my kids, and then take a nap. And then I'll get up from taking a nap. And just kind of, I think I'll get maybe 3 hours in the evening in before there's like dinner time and stuff like that, and then I'll like really get cranking at about 9 o'clock at night, and I'll go from like 9 to about 2 or 3, and that seems to be what's the most natural for me. I realize it's unorthodox, but I'm an unorthodox chick.
I actually found myself having a really tough transition from a very structured work environment where I worked in an office where I had to be there every day at a certain time, and people held me accountable if I, came in not wearing pants or something like that, and to a much more dynamic and loose work environment, telecommuting and freelancing, where the only person who is holding me accountable is me. And that was actually very tough for me. And it's something that I recommend people take a kind of a good hard look at when they want to transition to a telecommuting remote work environment. Is that, are you the type of person that either would be fine with sort of a self-imposed structure, or could create a structure for themselves? So I had to impose very strict, like, this is when I start work and this is when I end work and this is when my lunch is, and basically I had to recreate that office environment for myself, or else, I'd end up playing video games accidentally and lose five hours, or whatever it is that will suck my time away, because there's no one watching me. I have to like actively create an environment where that wasn't possible, and I've gotten much better at it. And with the time zone thing, my client in Australia, there's times when they're getting into the office at their 9 a.m. and it's 5 p.m. for me. So I had to have a long series of conversations about what the expectations were, their expectations for me and my expectations for them about communication and being online at the same time, because there just wasn't, like, I wasn't going to be able to stay up until 3 a.m. like some folks. I just wouldn't be working at that point. Like, it would just be being available for the sake of being available. So communicating and setting hard deadlines or hard stop points for yourself, and being precious with those hard stop points has actually been very useful for me. So they know, once it's a certain time, they know to ask the questions between 9 and 1 to me, because after that I'm sleeping.
I am also one of those unstructured night owls. I go to bed around 5 or 6 in the morning, and I wake up around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And that's not a given either, based upon how awake I am in the early morning, or how sleepy I am, and I decide I'm just not going to get up. But I have found that I tend to divide my day into stuff for other people and stuff for me. Like Heidi said, everybody's asleep at night. I tend to work on my own things at night, and I'm able to focus better on my own things at night. I also edit at night because, oddly enough, I find editing very therapeutic. And so I edit throughout the day. I tend to do things for clients during the day. And basically, I don't have like an organized schedule. I figure out with my client when I need to turn things in. I tend to have, 2-3 weeks before I need to turn something in. I know how long a particular project is going to take me. Like, if I have to write a particular document, I know how long it's going to take, so I can figure out day to day if I want to work on that or not. So I think if you are used to being in an office and you've had structure before and you've had a supervisor telling you, I need this by X time, one thing you really need to figure out is, how long does it take me to do a certain task? And so when you are off by your own with no supervision, you're going to know how you're going to be able to schedule your time.
And Toya brings up a good point, which is that there are different types of relationships with your employer when you're doing remote telecommuting. So if you're on a milestone base where there's a deadline for your work that needs to be turned in, as opposed to with my work with this Australian, with PlayCorp, it was sort of a daily check-in and a daily collaborative environment. And so the type of relationship affects the structure, how you structure your day, so that, if you don't, it sounds like if you don't need to be available to them at all times, then you can have a little more flexibility with your own personal time or the way you structure your day. Whereas if you are somebody who's telecommuting and you have your time zones basically align the same as the client or the employer, you might be expected to be on Slack or any sort of proprietary chat services all the time, so you can answer questions and like that. So again, it's about negotiating with your employer, negotiating with your client to figure out what works best, but knowing what works best for you at the same time.
Yeah, I went from working 9 to 5 office and then going to the games industry, which was studio culture, which was totally different. And then I went from studio culture to working remotely. So I've done all 3 things at this point. And the one thing that I found the hardest when switching over to remote work was getting used to asking questions. It's like I am not somebody who will inherently always ask a whole lot of questions about what I'm supposed to be doing, but it is necessary to do when you're working remotely. Even if you think it's obvious, it might not be. And so I'll precede my question with something like, this is probably a stupid question, but I just want to be clear. And it's like asking tons of those little questions to make sure that you understand what it is that they want you to do, or that they understood what you were telling them. And that becomes especially true if there's a language barrier. But yes, you will become friendly with asking questions.
And of course, something to realize on that level is because I'm sort of I've had the opposite problem. I'm always asking questions and then realizing, oh wait, my clients are are in bed at prime. I need to ask this question time. How do I manage that? And so it has been like ideally, yes, you get this all laid out at the very beginning, but don't blame yourself if it's also like a work in progress. That if you start it and you sort of figure after a while, like no, I actually do need more like direct feedback. I need to be able to ask questions and get them answered right away. Talk to your client about how to get that working. Think about how you can maybe rearrange your schedule. Something else to consider that I think a lot of people maybe don't consider, and that is it's not only just about your structure, it's about the structure of your client. We tend to assume that the clients we have are all 9 to 5 like office hours in whatever their time zone is. But you may be working with an indie who's like working out of their bedroom or their basement, and they will be keeping very, very unusual hours as well. So my current situation is I have 2 clients, one that's in China, and that has involved me shifting my schedule around to match, they're a full office, they're 10 to 7 Beijing time, and so I have to adjust to that. But then my other client is an indie in Hungary, and he stays up till 2 in the morning. So it's actually really easy to get hold of him during my workday. So that's something to consider when you're looking at clients, that the type of client you work with may affect the sort of schedule they have. So don't jump to assumptions of everything has to be on their 9 to 5. It could be on your 9 to 5.
And I'll jump in and say that I work best from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So in there with a couple of folks up here, and that's part of the criteria I think about when I am seeking out clients, folks who are at least 8 hours ahead of me. So that can help you narrow it down if, again, wondering where to start. Also, as far as how do I get to work, I personally find it helpful to do kind of a centering activity that's relevant to me. That could be a spiritual, religious thing, or something as simple as doing power poses even. So again, if you're just kind of looking for something to jumpstart, when you're in your home, but know you need to do work. And a separate thought I'll just add to that too is increasingly there are shared workspaces available out there for telecommuters and freelancers. I'm pretty sure San Francisco has a bunch of them. I feel like I've seen a few, Seattle, Austin, and that's the sort of thing where you can rent out a little cubicle typically for a certain amount of time, or potentially for weeks at a time. So
well, I was just going to add to that. Changing your setting once a week may also help. I do that as well. One day a week, around 2 p.m., I go to my favorite little pizza spot where I can go to the booth in the back, and I know I am getting work done today, and I sit there from around 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And so I know I'm going to be focused today. I am leaving my house. I am not going to have the distractions that I usually have.
Yeah, I do a similar thing with the stereotypical cafe. I'll sit in a cafe in the corner and do my work. But I always recommend people who do stuff like that to maintain a really good relationship with the staff there, because they get to know you, and you don't want to be that jerk that is always coming in and not tipping and just sitting at the table and taking up space. If you have a spot, be kind to those people. You want them to like you.
Something else to consider, obviously we've been talking about how to deal with distractions and how to resist distractions, and that is very important. But I also think that, to a certain extent, we tend to think of distraction as like, a pure enemy, that there is nothing good about distraction. But sometimes a short and managed distraction is kind of what you need to sort of reset your mind space and get like that burst of energy. That's why I've been actually experimenting recently with the Pomodoro technique, which is very much kind of like you set a timer, you work for 25 minutes, and then you have 5 minutes of like, free time that you can do something else. And I find that actually helps when it's, after the 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, I've like, even though I wasn't directly thinking about what I had to write, it's helped reset my mind space a bit. Now, obviously, some of you may find that, you need to get into a flow state, you need to not stop. But I suppose, like, my recommendation would be, like, if you find that there are types of short distractions in your day that can help help you get back to work, help you keep your energy up, then don't beat yourself up for quote unquote succumbing to them. As long as you get your work done by the deadline, do what you have to do.
Yeah, and if it is physically possible for you, and you're not in a flow state, get up and walk around like every 25 minutes, because sitting in front of a laptop, even if you can't sense it, is incredibly draining. And also, just because you're working, you're putting a lot of physical and emotional and mental effort into what you are doing. And so, getting up or moving around recharges your batteries. It's really important.
All right. Thanks so much. Our next question is, what are some technological hurdles to telecommuting, and what are your suggestions for resolving them?
Just have the help desk information. Like, if it's a help desk you're supposed to talk to, if it's a person you're supposed to talk to, have that information at the ready. I've run into a situation where one of the tools that I'm supposed to be working with is, for whatever reason, not working correctly on my laptop. And so that means that until we get that situated, I have to compose the game dialogue directly into the code of the game. And, anyone who knows me knows that you probably don't want me in your code. Luckily, they gave me a longer deadline because they knew that it was like really hard to like try to parse out visually where I'm supposed to put things. But that's just the kind of thing that can happen, and you just kind of roll with it. And I know when I get back from GDC, we're going to be doing a step-by-step, figure out how to make the tool work on my computer thing. And if not, we've got the hacky way.
This actually kind of dovetails nicely with what we were just talking about in terms of these types of challenges, technological hurdles, are best overcome by communicating with your client or the employer as quickly as possible, as clearly as possible, giving them specific details about the problem that you're having or the question that you have. And if you've established a communication pipeline that's been working, it should be pretty straightforward to resolve these problems. But it's about upfront knowing that you need to establish a communication pipeline, who you need to talk to, who's in charge of making this decision or resolving the problem, and not having it be, oh, you got to go talk to Joe, he's the so-and-so person. Oh, no, actually you need to talk to Jane, she's the person that handles questions from people.
Keeping your supervisor in the loop as well.
Right.
All the time.
So like having a point of contact, a specific point of contact, if possible, with a department is really important, so that you always have you know exactly who you need to go to.
A couple of points. The communication pipeline is very important, something that I have a really difficult time with. I'm working with devs who like to make major decisions in Skype chats, and there can be 50 posts, 50 messages in Skype, and there have been times where a major change was implemented, and a couple of us didn't know because it happened in Skype like 2 days ago, 50 messages away. And it was like 3 weeks later when we found out there was a major implementation change. And so there needs to be one place where all of the documentation is, and everybody needs to decide where that place is and to make sure, hey, have there been changes made? Please keep those changes in the documentation so that I'm working with the most recent information. And that's just important, not just for you, so you're not frustrated, but if people don't have that information, that can set the project back. The other thing is, if you're in a subcontracting position, in other words, there is a contractor that's working with a client, and then they find you, and you are actually working for the contractor, make sure you are also in communication with the person who is going to be approving your work, because that's going to be the contractor's client. I was in a position where I had no communication with the client, and I was trying to do my work. I was asking lots of questions. The contractor was trying to do his best to get the answer to those questions, and he couldn't. And that was probably very, very early in my career where I did not know to say, hey, I also need the email address or the phone number of the client so I can contact them directly.
I'll actually say one of the technical issues that I've had has been, of course, like one of the things that is supposed to help, particularly for writers, is prototyping and putting the text into, say, Unity and seeing how it plays out. I have not had the greatest luck at having at trying to organize with clients to set up my systems so that I can actually do that myself. So what tends to happen is I send off my text to China and they do the prototyping on their end. I get a video of it, but I don't get to actually do it myself. And I've asked them multiple times, hey, could we put Unity on my, could we get Unity set up so that I can do this too? And they're like, we have other things to do. We can't really do that right now. So depending on your discipline, you may end up being a little siloed off from things that way, at which point you just sort of have to communicate with the client and do and work with what you can do. So hence, I said, okay, well, if you, if I can't actually see what these scenes look like myself, can someone make videos for me? Oh yeah, sure, we can do that. So it's something to consider that maybe early on the process, if you get the chance, make sure that you're onboarded with the tools so that you can actually prototype and see the game and see the scenes and see the things that you're doing, because otherwise you sort of basically have to send it off into the ether, and then eventually someone comes back and says, we put it all in Unity and it sucks, go do it again. And you're just like, I could have figured that out earlier if I could have put it in Unity. So something to consider.
Yeah, there's one thing that I could strongly request is if you're a studio or a team that wants to start bringing in outsiders, bringing in remote workers, establish an infrastructure to do so before that, because there is if that person can't hit the ground running, you're wasting money on them, basically. You're wasting money on doing this sort of loop of, oh, actually I need a VPN so I can go and access the Git repository, or and then you have to set that up, and then you tell them, and then there's this whole lag time between request and implementation that is just a waste of time and money. So set up the tools that you need beforehand, before engaging folks, and that includes VPN, email, documentation access, things like that you don't necessarily think about because you're all in the same office on the same network. But as soon as you start introducing people from the outside into that process, it becomes a weird tangle of problems. On the flip side of that, if you're somebody who is looking for remote work, once you're past the conversations about what the job is and the sort of introductory stuff, it would probably be good to ask if they've worked with remote people before, so that you know they might have an infrastructure in place to make your job easier.
Also, on the stuff everybody doesn't think about, who is going to get you paid? I have this really funny story about how it took me a year and a half to get paid on a project, and it wasn't because the client was trying not to pay me. It was because I was working with a producer who doesn't have to deal with that. And again, it was early career ignorance for me. I didn't ask anything about that. And so, long story short, I went through 2 producers in a year and a half, and finally the second producer, because the first producer moved to another project, said, "Oh, we just need your checking account information, and there's one person in this department who will get it done for you."
That is, getting paid is a technological hurdle in a lot of cases. Like that is, it is weirdly difficult still to transfer money from one person to another in 2019.
We actually only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to push us just a few more quick questions. So, yeah, speaking to that, how do you prefer to be paid? And just quick answer. So, quick for me, I open a separate bank account at my bank and have my clients wire transfer in. There's sometimes a fee, and that's something you talk about up front for them to cover it. So.
I admit I'm lazy. I have them transfer the money, use money transfer directly into my main account, of which there is a minor fee, but not that bad of one. I also do actually use PayPal, but rather than paying to get the PayPal money put into my account, I actually keep it on my PayPal account and then use the PayPal to pay for business expenses and things like that.
I just get it wired to me.
I've had it wired to me. I also use a site called TransferWise, which makes cross-currency monetary transfers pretty easy, straightforward. That's been successful for me in the past.
Wired, PayPal, or if it's a client within the United States, via check, because I'm not charged a fee.
And great. Quick question too. Have you had any? We are not legally able to give you legal advice about this, but mention just really quickly if you've had any concerns or special situations with taxes or visas working with clients outside of your home country.
Well, that's actually it was something I realized I should have brought up about the is telecommuting possible? And frankly, if you are non-American, telecommuting is not only like doable, it may be like potentially one of your only options, because I've had so many American clients who were originally looking to hire me as a full-time employee. The minute they hear the word Canadian, they're like, "Oh, can you do remote work?" So yes, doing remote work can definitely help with the visa issue because you don't have to negotiate the visa. On the other hand, you do have to negotiate your country's tax laws. So please familiarize yourself with them, particularly which countries your country has trade agreements and tax agreements with, so that you don't end up paying both America and Canada a share of your taxes.
I've never been paid by a foreign country, so I don't know.
So occasionally when you do remote work for international clients, they will ask you to come do a studio visit. And depending on the country that you'll be headed towards, like as an American, we have some countries that I can just kind of show up at and it's no problem, I don't need a visa. Other countries, you do need a visa, and they're very particular about their visas. And do not leave visa stuff to the last minute, or if you get a bad feeling that your client isn't handling the visa stuff properly, don't be afraid to slow things down and get it done properly, because occasionally as you are going back into that country, you'll be sent into a detention center and then deported, as I was, because the visa...
He got kicked out of Australia, you guys.
Yeah, it's true. But that's because the visa situation is more complicated than just buying one online or just trusting that your client will take care of it for you. So be very careful with that sort of thing, even if it seems like it's straightforward.
I have never been kicked out of Australia or anywhere else, and I haven't had a real problem except for that year and a half thing getting paid. I have a single member LLC, So my contracts are with my LLC. If you want to get your own business, find out which one is right for you. You know, in the United States, we have LLCs, we have C corporations, that sort of thing. Find out what kind of businesses you have in your own country, and then talk to a lawyer about what's the most beneficial for you tax-wise.
Great. Thanks so much. Final question. We're at the end here. What's one thing you wish you'd known before you started telecommuting? And my quick answer is, I wish I'd known to just experiment with schedule styles for myself. I used to think like, oh, I love things totally open and free, but I actually thrive on having a production schedule for myself. So.
I guess I wish I'd known how much more challenging it is going to be to connect with your team when you're working, particularly when they are not English speakers. So it's something that for me is still a work in progress, but it is something to be aware of, but that you can overcome it, that you can take the effort to connect with your team and be sort of part of the loop as opposed to that random person off in some, office, off in their bedroom somewhere.
I wish I'd known that how important it is that you're always hustling to find your next thing, even when you're working with all your heart on the thing that you're doing right now. So you have to get comfortable with promoting yourself, and I've not been somebody who's typically been comfortable with that. But you start to get comfortable with that, and you have your website and you have your portfolio, and you realize that you really do need to kind of do that self-promotion so that people know to think of you when they need someone who does what you do.
I wish I had known how to avoid detention centers. But more than that, I wish I had known, I kind of knew intellectually, but I didn't know in practice to get people who know about contracts to review your contracts, or at least in the beginning, to actually look at contracts and the contract language. Just because you're a smart person doesn't mean you understand the implications of legal language. So getting a second set of eyes on contracts is a great idea.
I wish I had understood how important that website portfolio was, and that I had gotten one up a lot sooner, because people were referred to me and then they found my website and contacted me that way. But then I've had people who were just looking for a game writer or a narrative designer, and my website was one of the hits they found.
And one last quick thought, know what you're worth and ask for it. It can be very hard to do, especially when you're starting out. There are great resources within your discipline. We're all writers up here, so the IGDA Writing SIG has a great primer on kind of where to start with setting your rates. But ask for it, because they're not going to give it to you unless you do.
And one last quick note about that. If you don't have something like a SIG that's got that, look for something that's industry adjacent. Like look up what professional programmers make. It doesn't have to be professional game programmers or professional game sound designers. Just what do they make in general? You can probably find that online somewhere.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for attending with us today. I've put our contact information up here, so on some of our websites as well. So please feel free to follow us on Twitter, get in touch there or on our websites, and we'd love to chat more with you. We're going to hang around a little bit just outside the Career Theater if you want to keep talking, and thank you so much.